Akil Aline. I'm back again, and this is me chatting with my good friend Charles Boyd yet again. This time we are going to tackle the the slap heard around the world, as they've been calling it for the past, what's it been, 2-3 weeks now?
Yeah.
Weeks. Did you watch the Oscars at all?
I didn't watch the Oscars. I don't usually watch them. It's more like if there's some specific viral segment like this, I'll typically go back and watch it. So it was more like I was on Twitter, like just checking my notifications, and I saw somebody doing a parody of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air theme song, and where they had written something like "one little fight and my wife got scared," and I'm like, well, that's kind of random. And then I started seeing stuff about Will slapping Chris Rock, and at first it was hard to. It took me a little while to get the video because I think it had been sort of edited, possibly out of the broadcast, or there was something I think where the cameras cut away, but it took me a little while to figure out what had happened. But I was kind of shocked once I saw the video and got wind of what had actually taken place.
I don't usually watch the Oscars or really any award show except when there was a period when I lived in the States, especially when I was in law school, so about a decade ago, because my roommate at the time who was also one of my best friends from college, is a big, or at least he used to be a big enthusiast of all things pertaining to pop culture and show business. And so what he would do is he would host parties at our house whenever there was a major award show, the Oscars and the Grammys, and maybe the Golden Globes, I forget. But we would invite friends over, and we would take a drink, everything, something goofy happened, et cetera, et cetera. But that was the only time that I ever really watched the Oscars straight through, because I find it way too long and boring, and there's too much crap in the middle that I don't care about. Even on the rare occasions when there are some movies that came out that year that I was a big fan of, or that I went to see and was curious about and wanted to see win an award. And that's rare because I don't even go to the movies very often at all, generally. So I wasn't watching, but I got a random text message from one of my other college friends from New York that night saying, linking to, in fact, let me see if I can pull up the text message now. What did he say? He said he just linked to an article on Deadline.com, a blog I had never heard of before. And let me see. Right, yeah, he just sent this link to this Deadline.com blog that said, Will Smith slaps Chris Rock in the face on Oscar stage after jab at wife Jada Pinkett Smith's alopecia. And so I actually wrote back. I don't know how well you can see the screen here. Lord, I think it's backwards anyway. But actually,
Oh yeah.
I'm assuming it was a gag, right? And so he actually wrote back, nope, he lost it over a joke about his wife losing her hair. And so I guess he texted me maybe an hour or two after it actually happened in real time. So I immediately went online and started Googling, and lo and behold, before long, I found some evidence that it had actually happened. And I remember thinking, Will Smith seriously walked up on Chris Rock and bitch slapped him in the face in front of millions of people? Will Smith, of all people? But then I saw people commenting on it and analyzing and breaking it down online. And then I realized, oh, that's right. Back in 2016, Chris did take that little dig at Jada Pinkett when she was boycotting the Oscars over Oscars So White and over her no black nominees having been nominated that year, I guess. And he had sort of poked fun at her saying, Jada, you can't boycott what you weren't invited to, etc. And so I guess it occurred to me, maybe this is sort of the last straw in Will's mind. Maybe he feels like Chris keeps coming for him and his wife, and he's sick of it, kind of thing. I don't know. What did you think of the actual, I'm sure we both disapprove of the slap itself, and I tend to agree that even when a verbal provocation warrants a response, the response, if anything, should be verbal. It shouldn't be physical. But I feel like a lot of people were saying, oh, not just that he shouldn't have been violent, but that you should be able to take a joke. And a lot of people seem to be suggesting that Will Smith shouldn't even have been offended by the joke, let alone reacted violently. And that I actually disagree with, because I think that whether Chris Rock knew about Jada's alopecia or not, you see a woman, especially a black woman, this is coming from Chris Rock, a black man who's already put out a documentary in the past about black women and their hair and all the racial and political implications of that. So you of all people should recognize how important hair is to women in general and black women in particular. And if you see a middle-aged woman, especially a middle-aged black woman, losing her hair, you should probably assume, or at least presume, that there's probably some not mental, but health issue behind it. For all you knew, it could have been, her losing her hair due to chemotherapy for cancer treatment, hypothetically, right? Knock wood, God forbid. And so why, poke fun at something like that without at least knowing the facts kind of thing. So I actually thought that Will and Jada had a right to be offended by it. They just shouldn't have reacted the way they did. If anything, if I'd been in Will's position and had really wanted to make a physical statement, I might have walked up on the stage and jokingly, playfully pretended to put Chris in a headlock or something like that, but not actually fully slapped. That was absurd. With that said, what was your reaction to it? Do you think that even merely being offended by the joke, quite apart from the violence, made any sense on Will and Jada's part?
Oh, I thought being offended was perfectly reasonable. I mean, in general, one of the things that and I wasn't as good about this when I was younger, but one of the things that I have really tried to do is, even with public figures that I really dislike, I really try not to make jokes about their physical appearance because it's mean-spirited. You never know the context of it. You tend to insult everybody else who has that physical characteristic by extension, and it's just kind of, you ought to be able to come up with something a bit more creative than making fun of somebody's hair, not having hair, being overweight, etc. And then of course you add in the fact that her hair had, she'd lost her hair due to a health condition, so that's probably going to be a pretty sensitive subject. So I thought it was perfectly reasonable for Will and Jada to be angry about it. And I do think that, that they're going, that this is probably going to lead to a reevaluation of the kind of jokes that they tell at these kinds of things, where, hopefully they're going to maybe start transitioning away from jokes specifically about, very mean-spirited jokes about physical appearance, because, particularly when you're making the joke about somebody who's sitting there, that's, you never know how somebody's going to react, and because there's a lot of stuff that you don't know about their situation. And I would say that that kind of humor that specifically targets people's physical appearance, I don't think it's any great loss if we kind of move away from that style of humor.
I tend to agree. I mean, I think that when it comes to the whole debate about cancel culture and everything now, which has been brought up in the context of this incident and the reaction to it, I think that ultimately, when you're a comedian, yes, part of the territory is being transgressive and so on. But you also have to recognize that, look, when you step on people's toes, and especially when you're a wealthy, famous, popular, successful comedian like Chris Rock, you make millions of dollars a year, poking fun at other people, sometimes right in front of their faces, and sometimes the jokes are fairly harsh, or at least come across that way, or have that effect on the person, whoever's on the receiving end of it. You got to understand that not everybody's going to find the joke funny. Not everyone's going to appreciate it or play along with it or be a good sport about it. And the people who don't want to be a good sport about it have just as much of a right to free speech as you have. And I think that if you are going to expect everyone else in society to have a thick skin and be able to take a joke, then you should have a thick skin and be able to take criticism for the jokes that you tell at other people's expense. Which is why I actually respected Chris Rock's response, his reaction to Will smacking you. I think that's partly just Chris Rock being a naturally easygoing, laid-back, good-natured person, as well as him being very professional and knowing that the show must go on. But I think he also deserves his props, because I think deep down, he probably recognized, well, not that I'm glad he slapped me, or that I think it was acceptable for him to slap me, objectively speaking, but ultimately, I mean, I know I just basically clowned his wife and clowned, her physical appearance on a very sensitive level. So, I'll take my licks like a man. That was the impression I got. I could be wrong. But I also said this, I think it was about almost 8 years ago, summer 2014, not long before she died, the late Joan Rivers did an interview on CNN where I forget what harsh joke she had recently cracked. I think one of the jokes was about Michelle Obama. And she had said that Michelle Obama was a man or something like that. So this CNN anchor, it might have been Frederica Whitfield, said, she basically questioned her about those kinds of jokes. Do you think that maybe it's unreasonable for you to crack those kinds of jokes at people's expense? And Joan Rivers completely lost it and just flipped out on this CNN reporter, yelling at her and saying, "It's a joke. You're being stupid. How could you not see that it's just a joke? People need to suck it up and deal with it." And the whole time, and then she stormed off camera.
I make people laugh for 50 years. I am put on earth to make people laugh. My book is funny. I wear fur that was killed 15 years ago. I work for animal rights. Stop it with, and you do this, and you're mean, and you're that. You are not the one to interview a person who does humor. Sorry.
Are we serious?
And I remember thinking, get over yourself. I mean, I realize that you're a comedian, and to some extent, part of your job is to at least crack the occasional joke at other people's expense. But how the hell do you mean that you're a thin-skinned comedian? What the hell is that? You know what I mean? Like, you expect everybody else in society to have a thick skin and to be able to take your jokes at their expense, but you can't take a little criticism from other people? No. It's not everybody else in society has to be thick-skinned and you get to be sensitive. That wasn't even the first time I'd seen Joan Rivers flip out like that. I remember seeing footage of a stand-up routine she did where she made fun of special needs kids. And there was a guy in the audience who had a special needs child and actually heckled her by yelling out, that wouldn't be funny if you had a special needs kid. And she started blowing her top at him and yelling at him in the same way she did to that CNN reporter years later as well.
The only child that I think I would have liked ever was Helen Keller, because she didn't talk. It is just...
It's very funny.
Yes, it is. And if you don't, then leave.
It's funny if you have a deaf son.
I happen to have a deaf mother. Oh, you stupid ass. Let me tell you what comedy is about.
Go ahead and tell me.
Oh, please. You are so stupid. Comedy is to make everybody laugh at everything and deal with things, you idiot. My mother is deaf, you stupid son of a bitch. Don't tell me. And just in case you can hear me in the hallway, I lived for 9 years with a man with one leg. Okay, you asshole? And we're going to talk about what it's like to have a man with one leg who lost it in World War II and never went back to get it, because that's fucking littering.
And it's funny because this morning, actually, Joan Rivers' daughter, Melissa Rivers, appeared on The View and discussed this very topic, although they didn't get into Joan Rivers' reactions. They got into her track record, and I think Joy Behar, who's also a comedian, asked, do you think that your mother would have been able to keep doing what she did in today's climate? And she said, well, she probably wouldn't have caved in to the pressure, but I personally question whether she would have been able to get away with that type of off-color comedy nowadays. And I know even back in 2014, the year that Joan Rivers died, Chris Rock did an interview that fall where he said, I don't play on college campuses anymore. I just don't do it because, college students are too PC nowadays, essentially. And this is around the time that the term cancel culture was coming into vogue. So I found it interesting how this plays into that. But I don't know how you feel about that whole issue of comedians and comedy in general. Do you think that comedians have their own kind of responsibility to be thick-skinned as well, and not just everyone else in society?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, one of the sort of age-old problems of interpersonal human interactions is that we have a lot of people, and I think we've always had a lot of people who want everyone else to have a thick skin, and they themselves don't have a thick skin. And we see this that's become, it's always been very common on the right, when it comes to the whole thing of, on the one hand, making all the comments about the snowflake generation, and then on the other hand, just acting like a giant baby if somebody doesn't respect the flag, enough for your liking. But that also transitions, onto the left, segments of the left. I think that you see this with sort of aspects, and I think, some people would consider me a social justice warrior. I don't consider myself that, but I certainly have, I certainly agree with most of the goals of that movement. But there are segments of that movement that have sort of adopted the sort of traditional attitude of the right when it comes to the idea of I'm going to be, as harsh and biting as I want to be, but everyone else kind of has to take it. And if anybody says something that upsets me, then I'm going to get really mad and demand they change their behavior, which, again, has always been a very common thing on the right, but we also see it, segments of the left have kind of picked it up, and I think that comedians in general, I think that if you have a thin skin and your whole brand of comedy is, sort of revolves around being very caustic, then I think you're going to have a tough row to hoe, or a tough road to hoe, I guess would be the, is the expression, because you're going to be in a situation where not everyone's going to like your jokes. Sometimes people just aren't going to think the jokes are funny, sometimes it's not even a matter of being offended. Sometimes it's just the joke isn't as funny to an audience as it was in your head, and if you don't kind of let it roll off your back, then you're going to be in for a rough ride, because every audience is going to react to your material differently, and not everybody is just going to be clapping and laughing like a bunch of trained seals, and so I do think, and I do I haven't heard anything about Chris Rock or Joan Rivers having any kind of substance abuse issues, but I have just anecdotally, I've seen a correlation where it seems like, anecdotally, that a lot of individuals with substance abuse issues have a tendency to be very bombastic and kind of do whatever and say whatever they want, but get very easily offended or upset by other people's reactions or just other people's statements in general. So I do wonder with some of these comedians, not with Rock or with Rivers specifically, but I do wonder if some of these comedians, if there may be certain substance abuse issues that are sort of playing into this kind of thick skin for thee but not for me type of thing.
Now that you mention it, I never even considered that possibility, but now that you mention it, it might very well be the case. So well spotted. Finally, my question is, we heard late last week, I believe, that the Academy announced that Will Smith's penalty for slapping Chris Rock will be that he's banned from the Academy Awards for the next 10 years. Personally, I think that's excessive. I can see banning him for the next 5 years, up to the next 5 years. 10 years strikes me as way too long. That's a whole eon, if not a couple of eons in the movie business. And I just don't know that what he did was quite severe enough to warrant that severe a punishment. It could have been worse. They could have kicked him out of the Academy permanently. They could have snatched his Oscar back from him, which I think arguably would have been the worst punishment. So I'm glad they didn't go that far. But I feel like banning him from the awards for 10 years is a bit excessive. It's in light of exactly what he did. I'm not sure that the punishment fits the crime. I know, again, on The View this morning, Sunny Austin said she thought she approved of the punishment. She thought it did fit the crime. I disagree because it was a slap. A lot of people are talking about how Will Smith endangered Chris Rock's safety. Well, in a sense, he could have endangered it. If it had been a full-blown punch, if he had fully hauled off and boxed Chris Rock in the face, there are documented cases of people dying from a single punch to the head. So a punch, I would totally, or maybe like a karate chop or something, I think would have warranted that severe a punishment or worse. And frankly, under those circumstances, then I would have said, hey, Chris Rock should have filed assault charges against Will Smith if he had thrown a punch. He threw a slap. I'm not saying a slap is nothing. And there is what I learned in law school is called a dignitary dimension to a lot of the laws surrounding this sort of thing. For example, the principle in tort law that says the slightest physical contact you make with another person's body in anger constitutes battery, which is a doctrine that dates back to the English common law before the United States was even a country, so hundreds of years ago. And that sort of thing. It has to do with, robbing another person of their dignity for no good reason. So I'm not saying that the fact that it was an open hand slap gets Will Smith all the way off the hook, but I do think it mitigates his guilt such that a 10-year suspension from the Academy Awards is excessive. What do you think about that?
I thought it was massive overkill, and I would actually go a little bit further. Given the provocation, And given the fact that, by all appearances, Chris Rock was not seriously injured, and given the fact that Will Smith is already, obviously, I'm sure, very embarrassed, and given the fact that, that he doesn't have a track record of violent behavior like this, I would honestly say that any further consequences need to be essentially limited to, if Chris Rock wants to press charges, he can press charges and let the courts decide if Will Smith did anything warranting punishment. But I don't really think there need to be, I think that this incident was minor enough and provoked enough that I don't think there really need to be any more professional consequences, particularly because of the fact that there have been other people that have gotten, have ascended very high in Hollywood and have gotten awards like this that have done much, much worse. It seems like, if he had severely injured Chris Rock, like if there was a case where, if it was a case where Chris Rock had to be taken out in an ambulance, then sure, this would be a reasonable punishment. And like you said, that there would be probably grounds for Smith to face serious criminal charges. As it is, I sort of feel like, from a professional standpoint, this should essentially be wrapped up. And I think that if Will Smith deserves any kind of punishment, then that should be sort of handled in the court system if Chris Rock wants to press charges. I suspect Chris Rock does not want to press charges because he probably doesn't want this story in the news cycle, and he doesn't want to have to continually go through what exactly it was that he did that made Will Smith so angry. I think that, it was ultimately one of those things where he shouldn't have done it, but he did get provoked and they are blowing it out of proportion. As I understand it, also, he can't even attend he can't attend virtually for 10 years. And I read that and I'm like, well, what do they think he's going to do? Reach through the screen and slap somebody? I mean, and again, it would be different if Will Smith had a track record of attacking people. But as I understand it, this seems to have been the first time that he's ever done something like this. And I suspect, maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe now that he's done it once, he's going to want to do it again. But my assumption is that he probably won't ever do this again because it was very embarrassing. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jada may have chewed him out about it privately also. I think it's unlikely he's going to hit anyone else.
Yeah, that's true. I think you're right about that. I think he's almost certainly learned his lesson. I always found this very surreal, partly because it's Will Smith. This is a guy that I definitely grew up watching on TV. My mom used to love him back in the day because she thought he was a good role model for black youth. I don't know. I haven't actually asked her whether she still feels that way about it now. But anyway, I think you're right. Like Will Smith, it was highly unlikely that he would have done something like this in the first place. I'd say it's pretty much out of his character. Mind you, with a lot of the issues in his and Jada's marriage over recent years, I think certain tensions and frustrations probably built up, and that probably contributed a lot to this incident. But like you say, he's not, especially in light of these consequences and the backlash he suffered, he's not going to do this again, or anything like it, I don't think. Unless it's like actual legitimate self-defense, But I just wanted to close on this note by reiterating the point I made earlier. I don't like it when people in society pretend that they're these super duper thick-skinned people who are just cool as a cucumber under any and every provocation. Nothing ever bothers them, or at least nothing ever bothers them enough that they'd be willing to speak out about it and make a big stink about it, let alone get violent over it. I don't like it when people act as if butter wouldn't melt in their mouths and everybody else just needs to chill out and grow a thicker skin and act like nothing ever bothers them. You're not a cyborg. You're a human being like the rest of us. You've got foibles. You've got flaws. You've got human mortal limitations, and you've got sensitivities. We all do. We all have our buttons that can be pushed, including me. I'm sure, including you, and I'm sure, including a lot of these people who are pretending that Will should just lighten up and be able to take a joke. The way I see it, and I think you've mentioned this in one of our past conversations, that there's a culture in American society nowadays of pretending that people should be strong and act like nothing ever gets under their skin. And I don't think that's altogether healthy. There are certain things that a lot of people are too sensitive about, or where the sensitivity is based on misunderstandings and misconceptions. And we can talk about those cases. But at the same time, I think it would be healthier, and society as a whole would be better off if we could all acknowledge and admit that we all have certain things that piss us off or hurt our feelings, or both, or worse. And I mean, look, I come from a culture where people bust each other's balls all the time. You know, my family is from Trinidad and Tobago, and I grew up hearing lore, frankly. I can only describe it as lore about how, you know, Trinis are always joshing with each other and or as we put it, kicksing, or you know, catching kicks, or a more old-fashioned Trinidadian term is fatigue, where, you know, you just crack jokes at other people's expense and everybody is just sort of in on the joke. And the truth is, I've seen people, even from that background, have certain limits. You know what I mean? Everybody has some limits, unless there's something seriously wrong with you. Unless you have a screw loose in your brain, unless you're some kind of sociopath or even full-blown psychopath, you have some sensitivities too. Let's be done with this pretense that any of us are ever that completely unflappable and unshabathered by anything anyone might say against us. But I'll give you the last word on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, that it is better for people to just be honest about what sort of their hot buttons are, so to speak. You know, and that doesn't always mean that the topic can't be joked about. You know, I mean, because you know, every joke is going to offend somebody, but there's also, you know, there's also certain subject matter that, if you're going to joke about it at all, needs to be done in a very, you know, thoughtful, intelligent way. You know, so for example, like, I think that if you're making a joke about bigotry, there clearly needs to be some sort of satirical point where you're clearly mocking the bigots rather than mocking the group that's getting subjected to bigotry, you know. And I think that when it comes to physical appearance, I'm just not sure that there's a good way to make jokes about somebody else's appearance. You know, I think that you can make jokes about your own appearance. You know, it's sort of like, you know, for purposes of analogy, like, there are certain jokes, like racial jokes, that it's probably more, you know, it's probably reasonably more acceptable for Chris Rock to tell those jokes than it would be for me. You know, on the sort of flip side of that, there's certain jokes that I'll make about Irish people where I would not be comfortable making them about, say, Italians. You know, because I'm part Irish, I'm not, you know, part Italian. And I would say, like, if Jada had made a joke about her hair loss, I think that would have been fine. I think that that's something that Chris Rock, though, and really anybody else, should probably, you know, leave alone. And I think though that, you know, I will also say that there is one other possible silver lining here. This may actually be a watershed moment. I don't know. I don't want to be too optimistic, but this may be a watershed moment for a backlash against the concept of chivalry, because I've always argued that the concept of chivalry really does more harm than good when it comes to advancing women's rights. And, you know, I think that this may generate more of a backlash against that, because I've seen, you know, a lot of women saying that, like, that if their husband had reacted the way that Will Smith did, that they would have sort of felt patronized, because they would have felt like their husband was treating them as being very delicate. And I don't think that was Will Smith's intention. You know, I have no reason to think that he, you know, holds any kind of sexist attitudes. But I think that there's such a thing as sometimes being overly protective or, you know, overly chivalrous, and maybe this will be kind of a turning point where we sort of move toward a more sort of egalitarian way of treating each other. But I also hope this may be, you know, a turning point. You know, I suspect that from here on out at these award shows, the jokes might be a little bit less mean-spirited. because nobody wants to get slapped. I will also just throw out one other little thing that I haven't really heard mentioned much. Where the hell was security in all of this? Because it seems like, a fairly major part of the job would be making sure that somebody doesn't get on stage and slap the host. Like, it makes you wonder if they even had security, or if they tried to get their money back afterwards. But and I wonder, was it a situation where security thought that it was part of the show, in which case you would absolutely need to clue them in before if you were going to do a segment like that, you'd absolutely want to clue security in? Was it a situation where they were so confused that they didn't do anything in time? Was it a situation where they were all in the bathroom? I don't know, but it's kind of odd that it's honestly kind of odd to me that it got to that point, because I feel like, I just would assume that security would be there to grab him before he actually managed to put his hand, on Chris Rock. So, it's definitely a surreal incident. It's certainly one of the weirder things to happen at a Hollywood Awards show, at least on screen.
Yeah, I think there's, since then it's come out that I think some of the organizers asked Will Smith to leave, and he didn't, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but when it came to security, I think sometimes when it comes to those contexts, if there's never been an incident like that before, and they don't necessarily expect it, and as a result, they're not necessarily prepared to deal with it if it does happen. Whereas once it does happen, once there is a documented, observable case of it actually happening, then in future years, they'll be better prepared for it. So I'm sure they'll have some kind of concrete procedure set up to prevent that from happening again in the future, now that this has happened, now that Will Smith has blazed this dubious trail. For example, I used to be was and still am a big fan of the Love and Hip Hop reality series, which is very trashy reality TV, which involves a lot of violence. If you look at the first couple seasons of Love and Hip Hop New York, they had violent fights that only the producers of the show were able to break up. But after that, they started to hire full-time security who would be there, big, beefy guys who would be there routinely to hold the cast members apart from each other so that wouldn't happen again. And sometimes there would still be some violence where the cast members would briefly put hands on each other. But for the most part, they were able to prevent serious violence. So I think going forward, the security at these Oscars will be a lot more vigilant and better prepared. But with that said, I want to thank you for yet another great conversation, as always, Charles, and looking forward to many, many more.
Same here. I really enjoyed it. Looking forward to the next one.
Yes, indeed.